They're like deer in the headlights. This is another collaboration with Barrett on A Course in Miracles. It is the 14th of July, hot and summery and sweaty, and we're looking at what it is that often causes us to not be able to access those things that the Course offers us. And so right now we're going to be looking at the attraction of guilt. How are you this morning, Barrett?
I'm doing really good, and I'm not hot and sweaty, even though it is muggy and sticky outside. I'm enjoying looking outside, but not having to feel that humidity right at this moment anyway. Yeah, how are you doing today?
Good. You know, that's an interesting observation. We live in such a cushioned environment, but even in my lifetime, I can go back and look at things 50 years ago when I was in my teens, and my God, it was an entirely different environment to try and survive in. And of course, it was right in those early years of the 50s when we saw all of the air conditioning and refrigeration stuff happening. So, in the span of time, it's really been a very short period here where we've had the luxury of air conditioned homes and being able to somewhat control our environment.
It's true. I think, wasn't it around that time that they invented the modern numerical system too?
Oh, is that when that finally came into being?
Uh,
I know
that
it
was
was a dynamic era. I mean, there was a lot of things happening right in that time loop there. I think the wheel and fire were right into that zone too. So
Oh, well, I appreciate your rolling with my rather lame humor sometimes, but the other thought I had around what you're sharing is that today we are talking about the attraction of guilt. This is in chapter 19, Obstacles to Peace. It's a subsection of the first obstacle to peace, which we talked about last week, which is the desire to get rid of it. So our part of our desire to get rid of peace is the attraction of guilt. And as I thought of that word just this morning, I thought, well, guilt has a homonym, um, or maybe a homophone. I forget. But anyway, another word that sounds exactly the same, G-I-L-T. It's kind of an older style word, but it means like covered in gold. And I think it's interesting because the ego kind of does this. It covers things in its version of gold. You can maybe call it fool's gold. And we are always like enamored by these things, like, oh yeah, oh, if I get a new car, then I'll be happy. Or, if this person loves me, then I'll feel really great. And it's always something out there in the world that needs to be a certain way for us to be happy. And but we're starting to get that it's not real gold. It is that fool's gold, and eventually we stop kind of wanting to play the fool.
that is very true. And guilt is an interesting thing apart from the gilded form of guilt. And that would be our need to attack somebody because we have some kind of a agenda of our own that becomes highlighted, and we're sensitized to making sure that all the things we want in our world are in place. And when somebody comes along and threatens that, then we respond with anger and rage and frustration, and if nothing else, we isolate them and push them a little bit further out of our lives. And that's exactly the thing that creates the guilt, that makes our return to God so much more stressful, and so much more of a a committed journey, simply because we are always engaged in that kind of activity where we're attacking everybody around us to preserve our own sensibilities, and at the same time making sure that we nail that door to spirit solidly shut. And isn't that a strange, strange set of conditions to work under?
Yeah, it reminds me of this Far Side cartoon. It showed this building and it said, you know, something school for the gifted, and then you see this boy trying to push into the door, like he's obviously pushing pretty hard to try to open the front door. And like right above his head, there's a big sign that says "pull." And in a way, we're always doing that. You know, we're pushing when pulling, gently pulling is actually the way that would get us where we want to go. Another analogy that's kind of like that is, you know, again, attraction of guilt is the name of this title of this section, and we think that I don't like guilt. I want to get rid of guilt. Well, consciously we may want to get rid of guilt, but on this deep unconscious level, that's what Jesus is telling us, that no, we love this stuff. We feel in a sickly way like we really want it. So, you know, when I was a kid, I'd sometimes walk a little through the woods and then end up with all these little seeds with the little kind of stickies on them on my socks or pants or whatever that they kind of cling to. And the image that just came to me was like having those, but rather than like opening your hand, if they were in your hand, rather than opening your hand to release them, we're actually tightly clenching our fist, saying, "No, I want to let this go. I want to let this go." And we're like, "Okay, well, open your hand," you know. And that's what we're trying to become conscious of, is this unconscious clinging, this unconscious holding tight to fear and guilt and shame that needs to become in our awareness before we can start to release it.
That's exactly accurate, and I love those sticky burrs that you're talking about. Growing up in my childhood, that was something that was always a big part of my adventures, because I used to walk miles and miles and miles through the countryside around the ranch where I grew up, and I loved getting back home and cleaning those things off, and I, you know, marveled at them. And then 25 years later, somebody who marveled at them better than I did turned them into Velcro, and it was like, damn, you know. Yeah, well, I could have been a gazillionaire as I'm sitting there pulling these sticky burrs off my socks and not paying attention. So isn't that, again, the nature of our existence in this realm? But right, it is interesting how we do have this immediate response to everything around us that creates the guilt. And then if you're really honest with yourself, when you go back and look at that, whatever residue is left on the upper surface of the mind, at first you're feeling guilt. And then when you analyze the circumstance, you go back into that routine of, yeah, but they deserved it, you know. So ultimately, we're always reinforcing that ego and trying to protect it and trying to push it into the center of our circle of activity. And yet all the time, the ego is plotting to kill us. So how much of a psychotic circumstance can you imagine with that one?
Yeah, well, and I think, you know, turning to some of the parts of the section too, just really reinforces right what we're saying. I mean, he says, the attraction of guilt produces fear of love. For love would never look on guilt at all. It is the nature of love to look upon only the truth, for there it sees itself, with which it would unite in holy union and completion. As love must look past fear, so must fear see love not. So here Jesus is really talking about how there's only two thought systems and there's really no overlap. There's only the thought system of love, kindness, and joy, or the thought system of fear, anger, sin, and guilt. And we have to really look at the false in order to let it go. And that's why he leads us so deep into the ego's kind of craziness, so that we can understand it, so we can realize what we've been doing, and then we can start to make better decisions in everything in our life.
Very true. And that gets us back over to that whole breakthrough into truth and reality is when we arrive at that point where we can let go of this realm, of this world, and see it without any emotional response or attachment to it, and just become invulnerable to all those different circumstances that this world presents to us, to get drawn into being engaged and either running through the jungle in mortal fear of our life, or else chasing somebody else through the jungle with the intention of, hacking them into pieces. And that really is the key to the whole thing, I think, is to go back to that recognition over and over and over again, that this is not real. And that's the only way we can climb out of that pit that we're currently stuck in, where we are committed to fight or flight responses to everything that goes on around us.
Yeah, and that description of the pit reminds me of an image or a dream that Helen had. Helen Schuckman described of the Course, and this is all described in Ken Wapnick's biography of Helen Schuckman called "Absence from Felicity," which is an excellent book. I highly recommend it. But she had this dream where she was trying to get out of this very deep hole, and in the dream it was like she was partway up, but she was pulling herself up on a rope, and it wasn't clear that the rope was really attached to anything, so she wasn't making a lot of headway, and the rope was cutting into her hands, and so she was kind of slipping, and but there was this hopeless feeling of always trying to get somewhere, but not really knowing if you're making progress, and wondering if maybe it's just better to fall back to the bottom of the pit. I think that's very evocative, just like you were sharing, of just like Loki there is welcoming the mailman as he comes by. There's always things that are kind of triggering us, or feeling like they're causing us excitement or upset, but they're never really the answer to what we're really looking for. They're never giving us the peace and the harmony that we really want in our life. So we have to kind of look at what rope we're pulling on and see, is this the rope a rope of forgiveness that will really get us where we want to go? Or is this the rope that is just the same old, same old? Is it another thing here in the world that we think is going to make us happy? And then questioning whether we really want to have that attachment. And let me be really clear here, it's not wrong to have things in the world or to want things in the world. But as we do that, we can really look at whether we are pushing our peace away because of us not having this thing, or whether we're just seeing something here in this world that we're going through without feeling kind of heavy or sad about it.
Yes, absolutely. And, the priorities and the desires and the needs that we identify in this world as being important to us is always something that is subject to review, or it should be, over and over again. Because the more we are engaged in that pursuit of an objectified outcome, money or image or whatever, what ultimately occurs is that we end up trampling over the heads and shoulders of those around us. And a lot of times we do this unconsciously. It's a simple thing like, I need to make sure I've got money in my budget for that new car, or that new this, or that new that. And that makes it very comfortable for us to walk past the person on the street corner with the tin cup, who hasn't eaten all day, and who could desperately appreciate, even a small contribution to their well-being. So a lot of times we end up creating conditions that ultimately we're oblivious to on, like you said, the conscious level of life. But all of those little wounds to the people around us build up and lodge very deeply in the unconscious realm of the mind. And that ends up becoming another reason to be afraid of God, because we are conditioned by our own mythology of the past that God is going to get even with us for all of our transgressions against the world that we inhabit.
Yeah, and that is a big part of this section that we're looking at too. You know, a little further on, you know, he talks about how the fear of love is the final obstacle to peace, and it ties right in with what you were just sharing, Chris, about how we have this image of God as fearful or vengeful or punishing. It doesn't have any relationship to the truth of God, but because we have that image, and it might not be a conscious image, but it's somewhere in our mind, then we, you know, we make choices based on that belief, whether it's subtle or it feels like a big thing for us. And ultimately, we can come to see that false veil and eventually, you know, let that veil go, so that there's no real obstacle between us and the peace of God.
Right. And the key to this whole thing is to recognize within everybody that we encounter the presence of God. And that really is the insidious nature of the egos. The ego is always wanting to circumvent that very fundamental truth. So when we really look at this whole section we've been discussing here today, ultimately it does reduce down to the level of relationships and how we align ourselves with everybody that we do have interaction with, that we do have a relationship with, and whether or not we're willing to give them that little extra amount of grace and say, you know, beneath this appearance, there is not just divinity, but the highest level of holiness. And this is the one thing that is eternal and is fundamental to our own resurrection from the depths of our fears and from the depths of our avoidance of the truth that surrounds us at all times.
Yeah, and this section really does elaborate on all that. He goes into describing how we are actually kind of sending out messengers that are looking for things to be angry, upset, or fearful about. Or, you know, we're really kind of reinforcing this idea of shame. But then he follows that up by saying the Holy Spirit has given you love's messengers to send instead of those you trained through fear. They are as eager to return to you what they hold dear as are the others. If you send them forth, they will see only the blameless and the beautiful, the gentle and the kind. They will be as careful to let no little act of charity, no tiny expression of forgiveness, no little breath of love escape their notice. And they will return with all the happy things they found to share them lovingly with you. So what he's really saying here is that we have a choice. We have a choice to see the grace and kindness in every circumstance in our life, or we can look at it through eyes of judgment and condemnation. And regardless of how horrible or awful things are unfolding in our life and in our world, we always have that choice. You know, recently we've been watching a lot of people getting killed, a lot of people getting murdered, and there's anger and rage all around these circumstances. But there is an option here for us to see every act of violence as someone calling out for help, calling out for kindness, calling out for love, and to really know that we can respond to even the most drastic circumstances with that perspective. And it doesn't mean we don't necessarily do what is appropriate, send someone to prison or whatever needs to happen in order to keep people safe. But we can do everything that needs to be done with love in our hearts rather than anger and fear. And that's what it always comes down to, is which teacher are we choosing, which hand are we holding? Is it the hand of love or is it the hand of judgment? And we can make that choice.
And that is a fact. Uh, and as we travel a little bit further down here in this particular section, we come to this final imagery around who it is that you are entertaining, whether you're entertaining them gracefully or entertaining them in hopes of destroying them. It says, love too would set a feast before you on a table covered with a spotless cloth, set in a quiet garden where no sound but singing and a softly joyous whispering is ever heard. This is a feast that honors your holy relationship, and at which everyone is welcomed as an honored guest. And in the holy instant, grace is said by everyone together as they join in gentleness before the table of communion. Now, this next line is what I really love, and it says, and I will join you there, as long ago I promised, and promise still. Well, what we have to recognize within that statement is that he's not like coming from an exterior realm. In other words, whatever table you're at in this state of communion, Jesus is there within every individual that you're surrounded by, whether it's one individual or 10 individuals. And that was the subtlety that is reinforced in the Course over and over and over again, is that Jesus is not somebody exterior to you and to your circle of friends and family or your circle of enemies and frustrations. Jesus is at the core of every individual you encounter. And you can have communion with that presence as soon as you get your head straightened out and not worry about them. If you're approaching it from, oh, this guy is evil and I could never see, anything good about this person, well, then you've slammed the door and nailed it shut. The reality is Jesus exists within each and every one of us. And we have to be willing to humble our ego to the point where we can actually perceive that presence. It's like an evocation, but we're pulling it not out of ourselves, we're pulling it out of others through ourselves. So it does become kind of like a ride at Great America, trying to work your way through all this madness that we have created in this realm.
Are you saying I have to wait in line for 90 minutes to get up?
Yeah, it's good to take Gatorade with you too when you join those lines. I like the water rides that way. That way, even if you're all hot and sweaty in line, you get to take that plunge into the pool and come out feeling refreshed.
Yeah, it's always a good time. So yeah, this has been a beautiful ride today, looking at this section. And next week we will continue on to the second obstacle to peace, which is the belief the body is valuable for what it offers. So let you kind of think about that for the next week until we catch up with you then.
Yes, and that one can be definitely a struggle to deal with, because we do protect our bodies, and at some point you just have to let go.
True. And a heads up that if you want to kind of see us in our physical meat suits, you want to meet us in person, we are going to have an opportunity to do that in just a couple more weeks. On the 31st of July in Alsip, Illinois, at 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. We've got our Step into the Light Course in Miracles presentation. So it'd be great to have you there if you're anywhere in the Chicago area or might be that weekend.
And this weekend, you've got some stuff coming up too, right here in Chicagoland. So why don't you see if you can drum up some more participants?
My friend Jason and I are leading a weekend camping event, Saturday into Sunday. So one night, one 24-hour kind of event, but it's at Bullfrog Lake Campground in Willow Springs, Illinois. And you can reach out to me directly if you're interested in joining us. My email is Barrett, Barret, at barretthedin.com, which is barrethedeen.com. It's going to be fun. We're going to be doing a lot of different healing and hiking and time around the bonfire. So it'd be great to have you join us for that too.
So it is heating up as we're moving through July, headed toward August, and all kinds of outdoor stuff going on. Just as a way of reinforcing A Course in Miracles, either get your head set straight, or else make sure you slap your body down with stuff to repel ticks and mosquitoes. So one way or the other.
Yes. Well, it's good to be repellent in certain ways, I guess.
That is very true. Well, Barrett, I hope you guys have a great weekend out there running through the woods like gladiators, and we'll be convening here in 7 days.
All right. Look forward to it, Chris. Have a good one.
You too. Take care.
All right.